This lesson is on new challenges for African Americans. Please remember to watch, rewind, rewatch, restart, pause as many times as you need in order that you understand all the concepts presented in this video. It's important to remember that Reconstruction is over. It ended as a result of a compromise over the election of 1876. President Hayes is removing those Northern soldiers from the South. He is sending the federal troops home, and military rule in the South ends, and that is the end of Reconstruction in 1877. However, when these Northern soldiers leave, many African Americans are facing new challenges. The first of those new challenges is in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. In the late 1800s, Homer Plessy decides to ride in a white-only train car. He is African American, so technically this was against the law. The train conductor asked him to move to the car reserved for blacks only. He protests this and ends up taking the case to court. His case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it's his name, so you see Plessy listed first in the court case, and then versus Ferguson, and then Ferguson is the judge that he is taking to the Supreme Court to appeal his decision, so that he hopes to change it. However, the Supreme Court says, Homer Plessy, you were wrong, and separate but equal is okay. So as long as the two train cars are equal, it's okay to have a white-only car and a black-only car. This Supreme Court case puts the law separate but equal out there, which means segregation. Segregation is to separate, and in this case, we're separating African Americans and whites. It also made Jim Crow laws legal. These laws made discrimination legal. Discrimination is treating someone differently based on what they look like. It also led to unequal opportunities in housing, jobs, education, and more. So Plessy versus Ferguson is really this case that starts segregation at the end of the 1800s. And if you look at the cartoon over here on the right, you can see kind of a joke on the separate but equal. So we see two separate train cars, one for whites, one for blacks, but they're really not equal. And this is the case for most of the Jim Crow time period in the South. Separate but equal laws apply to transportation, so like Homer Plessy and the train car, so trains, buses, streetcars, anything they use to get from place to place. Restaurants, we have white-only restaurants, we have black-only restaurants. Public places like public restrooms, drinking fountains, libraries, anything can be segregated as long as you have an equal facility for both white and black. And also schools, you can segregate the schools as long as you have equal schools for white and black. However, unfortunately, most of the time we found that these resources and facilities were separate, but they were not equal, even though the law said equal. Two men emerge as African American leaders during this time period. One is Booker T. Washington and one is W.E.B. Du Bois. Both men wanted to end segregation and get rid of Jim Crow laws, but they both wanted to do it in very different ways. First, let's take a look at Booker T. Washington. He was the child of a slave in Virginia at the end of the Civil War. His view on segregation was that he accepted it because he expected it to fade away over time. He said, this is better than slavery, we are making progress, and as African Americans we need to educate ourselves and get some skills so that we can move up in the world. That's what Booker T. Washington said. His methods were that African Americans should attend vocational school, which means job training, and this would help African Americans move up and gain equality. So jobs they might train for would be factory work or carpenter or a mechanic, any working job that requires working with your hands and special skills. He founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. That's the name of his vocational school. And by 1900, he was the most famous black leading in the United States. In contrast, W.E.B. Du Bois was born in Massachusetts and went to Harvard. He wanted full political, civil, and social rights right this second. He said slavery's over. We have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. As African Americans, we deserve our equal rights now. Segregation is not okay. So in this way, he is different than Booker T. Washington. He wrote important books and articles against segregation, and one of his major accomplishments is that he is the co-founder of the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This organization is very influential throughout the rest of the 1800s and 1900s and is still around today. And this organization worked to end segregation and Jim Crow laws. Take a look at these three pictures, and they give you an illustration of some of what the Jim Crow laws did in public facilities. So the first picture is a sign above a water fountain, and you see it has two different arrows and two different water fountains. So they are separate, they are segregated. If you look at my cartoon on Plessy versus Ferguson, you can see Homer Plessy being removed from his train car. His is the court case that made separate but equal legal and started those Jim Crow laws. And finally, you can see here from this water fountain picture that there's a white only water fountain and then an African American only water fountain, and they are separate but they aren't equal. The white water fountain is actually electric, and you can see from the African American water fountain in the middle that it is not. You see on these signs words that say colored and white. Colored is not a politically correct term in America today. We will be referring to the newly freed slaves as African Americans or black. But because we are looking at primary sources from the Reconstruction and after time period, you may see some words that we don't use anymore today, and they are not politically correct. In conclusion, African Americans faced many new challenges after Reconstruction. It is important to consider the roles of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and their accomplishments in working to end segregation in the U.S. You need to understand the court case of Plessy versus Ferguson and the role that it played in segregation and Jim Crow laws. Please pause, rewind, rewatch, revisit this video as many times as you need so that you understand the concepts and these challenges facing African Americans after the Civil War.